Leading an ABSA Off-Road Championship event was a new experience for Pikkie Lambeskagni and Rikus Erasmus in the Rubicon Toyota Hilux, previously campaigned by Peter Ruthven. They were doing a good job in the special vehicle category, and the Rubicon racing guys were also in the driving seat with brothers David and Gary White out in front in the Rubicon Bat. Leading a race overall was also a novelty for the White brothers.
We're airborne again with our helicopter picking up Hicho and Jaap de Bruin, who are still running second among the production vehicles in the Micra XL Toyota Hilux. Early on in Loop 2, the de Bruins were caught by the Castrol Toyota Hilux of Duncan Force, with the factory team having no problem in cruising past the father and son privateers to move into a menacing second overall in the production category.
The way was now clear for Duncan Foss and Rob Howie to chase after production vehicle leaders Pikkie Lambeskagni and Rikus Erasmus, with a V8 Castrol Toyota Hilux having a clear performance advantage over the Rubicon Toyota Hilux.
The job of getting to the front of the SB class was made easy for Duncan Force and Rob Howie when the Rubicon Toyota Hilux of Pikkie Lambeskagni and Rikus Erasmus lost wads of time when an engine earth wire worked loose and the fuel pump stopped working. Force and Howie had nothing to gain by getting involved in a race with the Rubicon Bat of David and Gary White, and were quite happy to let them go past and disappear into the distance. A little further back, Richard Fuller and Jeff Minnett were still second in the special vehicle category and running at the head of Class P. Throughout the race, the Atlas Copco crew had settled on a steady pace, and it opened up a huge gap over the next car in Class P.
After a performance that had promised so much, it was the end of the road for Willem and Dana Vos. They coasted to a halt at a spectator point with the smoke from the Fossies Toyota Hilux signifying a blown engine, and another did not finish entry in the results column for the Rustenburg crew. With no such problems, it was plain sailing for Herman and Richard Sulwat, who'd moved into third place overall in the Sulwat Racing SVR. While almost unnoticed, Hannes Grobler and Henny Terstege had slipped into third place in the production vehicle category in their RFS BMW X3. The retirement of the Fossies Toyota also moved Malcolm Kok and Johan Burger up a notch, with the Kok & Sons Toyota Hilux now into fourth place among the production vehicles, with Bula Botus and Johan Pretorius also quietly moving up the special vehicle ladder.
The race was now entering a critical phase, and retirements had also lifted Thomas Rundle and Johan Moore up the production vehicle list. They lost a place on the road to Evan Hutchison and Dani Stassen, but the demise of Hicho and Jaap de Bruin moved production vehicle frontrunners up a notch. Rundle and Moore had built up a head of steam on an open stretch of road, and they gained another place when they flew past the Regent Racing Nissan Navara in the hands of Terence Marsh and George Smallberger.
After a rather disappointing Donaldson prologue and a quiet first loop, former South African champion Evan Hutchison and Dani Stassen were also making up ground in the four-wheel drive Motorrad Revo. They were at the front of a little train of cars that included the Baden Tyre Services Nissan Navara and the Marsh Smallberger Nissan, which was under pressure from KwaZulu-Natal crew Clint and Gary Campbell in their Gibson Racing Porter.
Local youngsters were enjoying themselves, and it didn't take long for Clint Gibson and Gary Campbell to catch Terence Marsh and George Smallberger. Once again, there was no point in the two cars getting involved in a race, and Marsh and Smallberger were happy to see the Gibson Racing Porter move ahead of the Regent Racing Navara. The Gibson team were also responsible for an act of sportsmanship that kept Swaziland crew John Thompson and Clint McNamara in the race. The Swazi team were packing up after the prologue when Gibson lent them a spare clutch that enabled them to make it to the start of the race. They were running second in Class P and were being chased by Mark Corbett and Rudy Balzar in the Century Racing CR4, which is earmarked for an appearance in the Dakar Rally.
For some spectators, a quiet, out-of-the-way spot is the preferred way to watch off-road racing. The real enthusiasts wait for every car to go past, with Naheem Mossaji and Rayon Badhanya involved in a little cameo duel with Class B Championship leaders Archie Rutherford and Mike Lawrenson in the Regent Racing Gymco. The Regent team were around 11 minutes behind the Class P leaders, but had a minute to spare over Marius and Yolinda Fourie and the PHP Bat. Charging along behind the Fouries were reigning South African champions Cully and Quinton Silwald in the elegant Fuel Bat. They were on the back foot following a Donaldson prologue that Silwald Sr. described as their worst performance this season. It was a setback for the team who arrived at Sun City fresh from a win on the Toyota 1000 Desert Race and an increased majority at the top of the Special Vehicle Championship.
It was in the 90s that Cully and Herman Silwald won the South African Championship before taking a lengthy sabbatical. The two brothers are now teamed up with their respective sons, with Cully and Quinton leading Herman and Richard in a good-natured family fight at the top of the Special Vehicle Championship. Behind the elegant Fuel Bat, the ever-steady Louis Weichelt and Francis Burschma were leading Class D, with the N1 4x4 Toyota Land Cruiser still locked in battle with the Team Ford Ranger TDCI of teenager Lance Woolridge and Ward Huxtable. Chasing after them were Dion Venter and Ian Palmer, who lost time at the designated service point, adjusting the rear stabilizers on the 4x4 Megaworld Toyota Hilux. Then, more high drama.
News was filtering back that cars had rolled on the route. The Orangeworks back crew of Jacques Wheeler and Philip Herselman arrived at a road crossing to report that the Atlas Copco Bat of Jan van Staden and James Rousseau and the Century Racing CR3 of Colin Matthews and Alan Smith had been involved in an accident.
Unfortunately, we were behind Johan coming through the dip here, and we were sitting just to his right. And unfortunately, the route does bend to the left and dip through, and Johan turned in, and as he turned in, we collided. But luckily, everyone's fine, and we're okay.
Paramedics were quickly on the scene, with Johan van Staden treated for concussion at a local hospital before being released. Out on the route, it was back to business, with the Mpumalanga brothers Johan and Werner Horn running third in Class D in the Malilan Toyota Land Cruiser. They were 11.5 minutes behind the class leaders and had an anxious moment when the Land Cruiser stalled.
But just a turn of the ignition key and luckily they were underway yet again.
A couple of locals who were busy gathering wood to keep the home fires burning weren't too interested in what was going on around them. For their part, Francois Conradi and Andrew van der Westhuizen were showing extreme caution as they picked their way across a rocky section in an early spec bat that was running at the back of the Class P field. Starting to close in on Conradi and van der Westhuizen were Class E leaders Deirdre Cutting and Christo Bosman, who were also taking the ultra-cautious approach in the Transcore Toyota Hilux. Overnight, Hutting and Bosman were worried about a leaking differential, but with the home stretch in sight, all looked well with the Toyota Hilux.